Welcome back to the Digital Accessibility Podcast. If you're looking to learn more about the field of accessibility, how to implement it within your role or your company, or to get advice on where to start or see how others have navigated complex issues that you may find along the way, then you're in the right place. I'm honoured to be able to share these insightful chats with thought leaders, advocates and practitioners of digital accessibility throughout this podcast, and I hope you'll find it a useful resource. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the chat. Today's episode brings the Digital Accessibility Podcast full circle. Early listeners may remember Paul van Workum discussing mobile app accessibility and the early days of what would become ABRA. Fast forward to today, and ABRA has grown into a company helping global organizations build, test, and maintain accessible mobile apps at scale. I'm joined by two of the team at ABRA, co-founder and mobile accessibility specialist Jan Jaap Groot, and accessibility and product consultant Tanya Jan Jaap. We get into why mobile accessibility still lags behind the web, where automation helps and where it can fall short, how the European Accessibility Act is shifting priorities, and why mindset and culture matter just as much as the tooling that's being used. It's a grounded, practical conversation around what actually moves the needle in accessibility and why fixing things after the fact is never really usually enough. Welcome to the podcast, Tanya and Jan Jaap.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. Nice to be a guest here.
Very pleased to have you here. And I guess we'll start at the beginning. And some listeners, long-term listeners, will remember Paul van Workum, who's also a co-founder of ABRA. He was an early guest on the podcast. We talked about the App Foundation and the early efforts to make app accessibility more measurable. So I guess now that we have you both here, Tanya, would you be able to sort of talk us through how ABRA has evolved from the earlier days and how pieces like training, audits, and your product work have come together?
Yes, sure. Thank you for the question. Well, as you mentioned, if we look back at ABRA, it really started with the accessibility knowledge about the mobile apps, and it started with ABRA. I think it's fair to say that Jan Jaap and Paul were pioneers in the mobile apps accessibility knowledge and put this great resource together, which is still is being used by many users across the world. And from knowledge about the mobile accessibility and the app, we moved a step further, because of course, if you have that much knowledge, you want to use it in practice. So we started to look into the accessibility of the mobile apps of the clients to perform the audits for our clients, and added our own approach and our own reporting tooling, which we are still using internally. And that's how we got insight, or we learned about what do the companies do inside about mobile accessibility. And there was always that vision that mobile accessibility should be automated as much as possible. And the testing should be as easy as possible. So that's why and not many companies are doing that back then, but still you will not find a lot of companies that offer tooling on or software that tests mobile apps on accessibility automatically. So we saw opportunity on the market, and that's why we spent the past 2-3 years on research and development on our own tooling on the automated and semi-automated testing. At the same time, we continued helping companies with audits, and what we saw is that the tooling alone is not enough. The external help with the testing is not enough, that there is also a gap in the area of accessibility knowledge. So actually you must know things about mobile accessibility in order to perform tests or in order to use the automated tooling. So that's why we added another component, ABRA Academy, and we recorded some online trainings that we share with the companies. We also do in-company trainings. And we put actually, besides that, we put all our knowledge on paper in our ABRA documentation and created our own rules with the solutions and explanation of what you need to test, how you need to test. And that's how we ended where we are now. We still believe that in order to succeed with the accessibility, with the mobile accessibility within the company, you need actually three elements: knowledge, tooling, and skills. And we try to combine these three components in our offering.
It sounds fantastic, and yeah, rightly so. And the documentation is obviously a key part of that as well, in terms of having that available. I think that from my perspective from the beginning, when I was first introduced to ABRA, very much, and this community in general in accessibility is a lot of sharing, and I can see that from your side as well. It's an awful lot that you give out to the industry for free to sort of help further things in this space. But I'll bring things over to JJ, as you're also known as. I just wanted to ask from your perspective as well. So were there any specific gaps that you saw in the industry that made you focus entirely on the mobile side of accessibility and then start building the technology behind ABRA?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, for me, like my background's just in computer science, software engineering, so I was really interested in building apps when smartphones came out, so around 15 years ago by now. Sort of had Android and then iPhone, and yeah, I was really fascinated with the idea that you could write applications or apps as they're known. And now, yeah, to do something on a physical device, so really writing software sort of a portable device, that felt like magic to me. So when I had the opportunity to study, I yeah, chose computer science, and yeah, really started there. And sort of whenever I learned more about programming, I really want to put it in practice and started building apps to learn more about the knowledge or the courses that I took. And yeah, basically from there, I yeah went into the field of accessibility, and that's when I really found out myself that there's just not a lot of resources out there. And I sort of became fascinated with this topic about mobile app accessibility, and it was a little bit disappointing, to be honest, just because even for some easy issues, there's just not really solutions available. So that's when I eventually decided, so together with Paul, to make this knowledge base, because there just was nothing there, so mostly it was out of need. I guess we also saw opportunity there that potentially could turn it to some kind of business. But mostly it started out of need, and also for myself, because sometimes I just wanted to make my apps more accessible for my users. I just didn't really know how to do it because there were just no resources there.
Yeah, interesting. And that nicely brings us into the next sort of segment on this, in terms of the differences between sort of the website or websites accessibility, and there's still a perception that accessibility is something that mostly applies to the web, and mobile is somehow secondary, or it's already got built-in features and things like that. So a question for both of you, I suppose. I know that obviously, JJ, you're more on the technical perspective, but Tanya, when you're sort of performing the audits at ABRA for mobile apps or training teams, are there any key differences to share that stand out compared to the web, and why would mobile need its own sort of set of rules and things?
Yes, I think it's a great question. And from my perspective, if you look at the mobile development in general, If you want to develop a mobile app, then you go to the team of the mobile developers. So it's a rare case that you would find a full stack developer like Jan Jaap. It's more an exception. Most of the time you have either iOS developer or Android developer. And even more often, you will find like a Flutter developer or React Native. So depending on the technology or on the platform, and this is for the reason. It's for the reason because mobile developers will not develop a website, and web developers are not able to develop iOS or Android web, and it comes because the concept, the development concepts, and the concept of the product is really different. So when it comes to the mobile teams, I get more questions which are going in depth already because they do understand that web and mobile development are different. But if we look at it, it starts very simple. Think about where the mobile apps are used. It's on the mobile devices, and the mobile devices are small, are portable. You are using it closer to the face. You're using with a touch navigation instead of the mouse most often. So the whole principles, how you navigate, how you use the mobile apps are different. That's one. And from the technical side, the websites are built based on HTML. And when it comes to the mobile apps, there is no unified manner how you develop an app. And when we test, for example, with our automated tooling, I come to the conclusion that the app development is sort of a state of art, because it's every time then developers come to the new ways to build the components together. And then, it's surprised me every time. And when we look to the interpretation of the guidelines, for example, that are in the most cases that are applicable or that were written for the websites, then we see the biggest differences, and then where it comes to a lot of questions and interpretations. I would name one example of a target size, for example. It's a criterion from the WCAG 2.2, and basically it says that there are two criteria for the minimum and enhanced target size. That there should be if we look at the minimum target size, then there should be a minimum size of the target that you use with your pointer. If you use a desktop or your laptop, you will be most probably using your mouse. And if you are using your phone, you will be using your fingers and the touch gestures. So if you look at the minimum criterion, it says that it should be 24 by 24 CSS pixels, which first is not used. The size points are not used in the mobile development, so you should interpret it which units will we use in the Android and iOS apps, because it's also different. And secondly, if you use 24 by 24, it's so small in the mobile space that you will barely fail it ever, because even iOS and Android guidelines, they give a much higher recommendation. So you cannot apply it literally. It just doesn't make sense. So when it comes to the key differences, then we always look very closely to the definitions, because some of the definitions are not applicable or should be used with some exceptions or with some notes, and some criteria from the guidelines, they also will be either not applicable or should have some additions or some extra interpretation.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and it's really interesting hearing it from that perspective, because a lot of the conversations I have are around the fact that the WCAG are guidelines, so it's not written law or legislation. It's something that you have to interpret and use common sense, I guess. But it's a shame that not every developer will have the WCAG criterion as their set standards. But yeah, that scalability of between the web and mobile and how that differs is really, really interesting. I can imagine if I'm trying to click on a very specific point on my mobile screen, I'll probably miss it quite a lot. Just because of my fat fingers. But so JJ, from a technical perspective, from your own perspective as well, so what makes mobile accessibility distinct? Things like native components, so gestures or platform behavior, how is that complexity influencing how ABRA specifically is approaching automation and testing?
Yep. Thanks. It's I think one of the biggest differences is what Tanya mentioned, and it's also something we're now focusing on in the mobile accessibility task force, where we're trying to interpret and apply and provide guidance on how do we map WCAG to mobile applications. And it's mostly about the definition. So of course, in the success criteria and also in the guidelines and principles, there's just text, and then within those text there are words, and then certain words mean different things to people. So that's why it's very important that certain words are defined and that it's understood by everyone, are used in the same way. And that's sort of what you see is the more you know, the less you know, because at first we felt we knew everything, and then we start diving into some definitions that in the past we would just do our own interpretation, and we felt that we understood it. And then now with a larger group, there's more input, more interpretations, and then you sort of try to find common ground, and sometimes that's different than how we have done it in our audits, for example, or even in our automation. That's the difficulty, and it's also that there's two platforms. So on the web, there's luckily one World Wide Web. Of course, there are sort of interpretations by different browsers, which sometimes from a technical perspective, your website can look different in different browsers or might not work. But at least the standard, so how things are supposed to be, so sort of the definitions, those are written by one organization, and that really helps a lot. And there's also a lot of differences from recommendations from Apple and Google, but mostly they are somewhat aligned. But to add on what Tanya was saying, the 24 or 44 is in WCAG, either on minimum or enhanced, and then on Android we have 48 DP, so that's the Android unit density independent pixels. On iOS you have actually the same 44 in WCAG, but then it's just points and not CSS points, which is sort of iOS points. But you can already see some differences there, and that's for automation the problem that you have to make rules, which is sort of your source of truth, and define how am I testing this, and then for each rule you would have sort of a testing procedure and have certain steps to go through. And I guess what we found out when making those rules, that is also different how you would test manually versus how you test automated. Like sometimes with manual testing you might have more or less information compared to testing automatically. So those steps are not always exactly the same. I think one big difference in sort of auditing manually and automated is just manually you just sort of look at your screen, and you can, when you're done a few audits, you can spot some issues, or you sort of look at a component or at an icon and see that it's missing a name or missing a role, and then sort of go to the next item. But for automated testing, you sort of have the rules. So you just have one rule that just checks every image for certain text. So it's not going through the screen in the same way. And also for automated testing, you would like to reuse some of the logic, for example, to determine all interactive elements on the screen, because it's needed for checking the name, checking the role, checking the values. You're sort of reusing the same logic. So the testing steps are very different sometimes from manual testing. That's one of the biggest challenges we have, and that's where I get more jealous now with Do What We See, because they have a lot of different working groups and different task forces and other initiatives that are trying to solve very similar problems on the web. And some of them they already solved. Like one example is the accessibility conformance testing, ACT. So they already have a lot of tests where they just provide some source code, so either some HTML, sometimes CSS, JavaScript, and basically have testing procedures and just tell you, okay, I have this. These are my 3 source files. When you load those and you execute this test procedure, this should be the outcome. So it should either be fail or pass or give some other kind of output. And you can just basically make your rule engine and just get all that input data and check your outputs, and you get a score. And it also helps for people that are in the market to buy such tooling, because they're able to then check how well are each tools scoring on these ACT checks. And that's all missing in apps. So in apps, it's just all companies in the automated testing solutions are just making their own rules, and so it becomes harder to compare and harder to check what they're testing against. So that's a big gap that still exists in sort of the mobile automation space.
So a lot of blurred lines, I suppose. And that's always going to be a difficult thing to overcome when you're trying to get to a final sort of solution. Because to one company, they may feel, we've hit the nail on the head. Everything's accessible, until someone else comes along and says, but only to your own guidelines or only to your own sort of set standards. So yeah, tricky. And hopefully things will become a bit more aligned in the mobile space, as I think that they're starting to with web and the WCAG. I know that a lot of the mobile guidelines are built from WCAG as well, or trying to interpret and sort of port them across. But hopefully it will be a bit more of a globalized, standardized procedure. Ideal world, we can always dream. That would be great. Awesome. So bringing that on to what ABRA is doing, and comprehensive set of solutions that blends technology and human expertise, as you've mentioned earlier. JJ, can you tell us about how the automated side came together? I guess it's very much related to what you were just saying. How ABRA's tooling works, or what makes it different, and are there any other sort of differences or challenges that you've experienced when putting together your own sort of automated side of things?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I'd love to talk about this part. I think for us mostly, it really started from the services we're providing from the audits, and we learned a lot from those audits because we knew what issues were happening in those apps, and we also learned which issues developers were able to solve and which ones they got stuck with. And the same from our app foundation, so the non-profit side. We had sort of a hotline where users could also report issues. So from that side, we also had hundreds of reports from users with various kinds of disabilities, and they were just telling us which barriers they have. So we sort of combined this data to really know sort of which success criteria or which issues were most common. So both from sort of legislation side, from audits, and from users. And from there, we really started looking in. So the result is this one we are still working on. Like, we have just launched this for Android, and I'm now working on the final bits and pieces for iOS. So it's for name, role, value, and state. And that's something that surprisingly we saw both from users as well from audits. That is really one of the most common issues we are seeing. So a lot of users were just reporting that there's maybe an app with a PIN code screen, and then it has a lot of numbers like 0 all the way to 9, but each button would just read or announce something like button, 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 if the role would be set. Because sometimes there's not even a role, so then you would basically just hear nothing, or maybe hear something like image, 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 or just don't hear anything at all. So we sort of tried to figure out how can we solve this. And from our audits, we also knew that some of the unsolvable issues were many times for cross-platform frameworks. So a lot of times, if people had built an app using Flutter, React Native, or Xamarin, .NET MAUI, those are some of the larger and more popular frameworks, that sometimes they would get stuck in our audit. So we do a re-audit, and they just were not able to fix some issues. And I think that also influenced our decision for our tooling to really go native. It also made sense for us, given my own background as a native Android developer, native iOS developer, to really do it natively. But it also meant that we have to different solutions. So we sort of have our product for Android that we're building. So we're doing this in Kotlin, and then we have iOS in Swift. So we have 2 different platforms, 2 different programming languages. Because that way we're just able to dive as deep as possible in the operating system and basically get the data that we need, because that's what we are seeing. And I think it's true for any kind of automated tooling, but also for the web. Just the more data you have, the better results you can get and the more sort of rules you can build. And by doing native, we're just able to get just a little bit more data than if you would do using some cross-platform tooling. And that's interesting also for us, that we knew from our clients sort of which tooling they were using. And a lot of people were also using native automation frameworks. So we knew there was sort of a market there to get started there. And we also looked into the cross-platform tools, like Appium is a big one that can be used on both Android and iOS from sort of one testing script. But internally, it's also using the Android automation framework and the iOS automation framework, because there's basically just no other way that Apple and Google are providing to do automation. So by doing native, it allows us to sort of build first for native first applications. And if needed, we can also expand to other frameworks because they are internally also using those same frameworks. But it's a lot of work, like Tanya mentioned. It's like 3 years that we're doing this, a lot of research, and then more than 2 years now actually building the product. And there's just so many exceptions you have to deal with. Different devices sometimes give different results. There's just a mix of so many variables, like the manufacturer of the phone, has it been made by Samsung or like Huawei or some other vendor? And even on Apple side of things, we see differences between different iPhones, even if they're running the same operating system. So sometimes there are some apparently if-else statements in there based on device models. One interesting one, we also got that someone was using an iPhone in China, and the Wi-Fi or so the internet connection worked differently compared to Europe. So we are seeing a lot of differences there. And I think one of the biggest issues there is sort of reproducing those issues, because we don't have every single device or every single manufacturer on every different operating system. So sometimes it becomes difficult for us to reproduce those results. And that's why we now finally have a solution where we can basically have a snapshot from our client, and then we're sort of able to load this snapshot into our system and sort of reproduce this exact how the screen is looking for them at that moment and how it's sort of behaving. But there was one of the issues that we have to solve.
It's a really, again, so super interesting, because it's something that I think is quite widely overlooked, is the device and it's, or the access. And because you would just think, okay, well, it's an operating system, so we'll do a certain set of rules for this operating system and then that should work. But there's so many other variables that just makes this that much more complex. Is that sort of, just to double up on that question, JJ, is that sort of purely a mobile accessibility side of things or mobile automation? Or would you see similar, depending on what kind of desktop or laptop someone's using for a web app or a website?
Yeah, I think it could definitely be similar there. I think maybe on mobile there's maybe a bigger chance in apps, because the sort of native APIs can maybe behave differently. But interesting, some people don't like truly realize this. In the end, the browser is also just an app. So if you have Safari or Firefox or Chrome on your Android or iOS device, it's also an app. So potentially those native APIs are also running on there, and then it renders the web content. So technically speaking, browsers are always sort of hybrid apps, because they have partly native features and then sort of a web view, or like their own sort of way of rendering the web. So they, I guess, maybe have the worst of both worlds, because they have to deal with both the native parts and also the web parts in one app. I think it can definitely happen on the web with devices, and I think that's also what they are seeing there. That is just difficult to reproduce. But I think one benefit the web has is that it's sort of more open in nature, so you can sort of, for every web page, just see the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript, and download those, and that's sort of your snapshot. Like, of course, there's some nuances there, but in an app, you basically just see visually what's there, and what's behind it, running it. You have very limited access, so it's immediately a lot harder to check.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Okay, well, I mean, good thing that we've got people like yourself working on that. And so Tanya, so through the audit and training and side of things, you must see areas where I think we've discussed this as well, where automation isn't quite enough. So that human interpretation and understanding is still very essential to achieving accessible outcomes. So how much of that is also ingrained in what ABRA is doing, what you're doing with ABRA, in terms of actual sort of working with disabled users, or the human element of the manual testing side of things as well?
Yes, I think if we look in the comparison between automated and manual testing, and if we look at how many different issues can you find with the automated testing comparably to manual testing. If you would like to come to 100%, if we take, for example, a WCAG guideline as a basis, because if you conduct an audit, of course, you need to have a checklist, the issues were the basic standards that you apply, then it would be probably 20/80, so 20% of the issues, if the app, depending on the type of the app, then would be found automatically, and 80% manually. And automated testing is always a great way to start with the testing on accessibility. And if you continuously have to test a lot of screens on the basic issues that appear frequently, like name, role, value, state, then it's a great way to identify a lot of issues on a lot of screens. So it saves really a lot of time. And if you have a tooling that can report it and tell you how you can solve it, then it really saves a lot of time. But a lot of times when you want to come to 100%, then you need to dive deeper. You need to check the screen, to check the situation, to analyze the context, and it can be different in each situation. So it's hard to automate it, because automation programming, it's about zeros and ones, and when there are a lot of exceptions, then you start to automating all the exceptions, and that's not feasible. And what we see is the downside, of course, of the manual testing is that you have to have a lot of knowledge again. But also for automated testing, what we see is that sometimes the results of automated testing can be different from what you test manually. And sometimes it drives me really crazy. But it's because how the app is built. So when you look at the code, I will make an example. So with our new feature of the snapshot testing, you can see the accessibility tree, the hierarchy of how the elements are built and the accessibility properties of the elements. And if I, for example, have visually a button login, and I test it with a screen reader, and I hear login, then I will reject it based on that the button doesn't have a role, that the screen reader doesn't announce a role. If I make an automated test, then probably this element has two sub-elements, text component and interactive component, and then a text component would be focusable, but it would not have a role. And then the other component, interactive component, will not have a label, but will have a role. So the same element, it would give a success on the same button, because programmatically it has a role, but the accessibility focus is put on the different element. And the question is always, how do you report it? How do you report it to the developers? And if you have, of course, a little bit of accessibility knowledge, then you are able to understand the differences and to interpret it in the correct way. So this is sometimes it's challenging. And what I also see in practice, because the developers sometimes are being very creative, then the results, it's really difficult. It's more like existential question. What would you reject? Like, is it what is programmatically correct or incorrect, or what the users hear and what they actually need? If the button, if the button's name, role, value, and state, sometimes developers put all of them in the name of the element, but our test will give an error that the element doesn't have a role, state, and value, and programmatically it is also that way. But is it correct to reject it? Because the users, they will probably be able to use the app because they hear all the needed information with the screen reader. So, but if you combine both, then you are able to pick up the best of the both worlds and to really solve the issues on a very deep level.
Yeah, I think that's quite funny. Well, it's not funny that it's not being done correctly, but you kind of don't want to tell the developers off because they've clearly tried. They've just got it the wrong way around. So you don't want to be like, no, you're wrong. This is bad. It's like, it's that re-education. It's the knowledge piece that you've mentioned as well. So, but that's quite an interesting one to come across. But it must drive you crazy if it happens too often. But brilliant. And now, really exciting question. I suppose. So the European Accessibility Act, or EN 301/549, and the sort of updates to that legislation, starting to reshape a lot of conversations around accessibility, and especially for mobile, but also, I guess, hardware devices and other things as well, kiosks. So, Tanya, are you seeing a shift in how organizations you work with approach accessibility now that the EAA is here, it's on the horizon? Are they becoming more proactive, or are they still very much reactive? I suppose what we've spoken about today has been sort of reacting to issues that have already been built into existing apps and services. But are you starting to see people put things in place for breeding that culture of accessibility into their products and services?
Yeah, we do see a shift or a different, but mostly within the larger organizations, because of course the bigger the organization is, the bigger the chance that it will be checked by the authorities. So we see that the larger organizations, that they start conversations about accessibility, about mobile accessibility. They come to us to conduct an audit and to make a accessibility statement or a VPAT statement. And then, of course, you need to make a plan and to make steps. What we also see, of course, the part of the big challenge, if you already have an app or several apps within a large organization, and you have these apps already for years, if they are not accessible, and then you start working on accessibility, it costs a lot of time and a lot of money, and it's basically, it's probably cheaper to build a new app that is accessible. But this is the challenge. But with the small steps, of course, you can relatively fast make a big change. What we see at the smaller organizations, there was a peak around in the summer when the European Accessibility Act went official. But of course, it means also extra budget and extra efforts for the smaller organizations. So often, if the organization has an accessibility champion, so someone who is passionate about accessibility himself or herself, then they will bring this change also within the small organization. If this person leaves, then it dies basically. So this is very sad to see. And also what we see is that implementing accessibility within the organization independently, large or small, it's a part of organizational change. So we can offer all the tooling, we can offer all the knowledge, but it's the people inside the organization who should do it. And this is often a very slow process that requires a lot of internal changes, and it's often a bottleneck, unfortunately. But still, we see that, again, a large organization, they pick up it as a project. So they are interested in online trainings and implementing, of course, the tooling in their processes and doing regular audits. It's approximately on the same level how it was. And as for the legislation, there is maybe good to mention that there is a new version of AN standard that is now being, let's say, approved, or that will also refer to the WCAG 2.2, so the latest version, and to the WCAG to ICT, what's applicable to the mobile apps. And WCAG to ICT has made also a new version, or updated version, which is also now being approved and discussed. So we see that there are a couple of changes within the standards coming, but they are also more harmonized. So the WCAG to ICT, if we're talking about the mobile apps, WCAG to ICT and AN standard, they talk to each other. So the things that they changed, they actually harmonized. So it's a good step ahead.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a continuous work in progress as well, isn't it? I think. But great to see that those things are happening. And throughout what you were saying there about you can provide all of the tooling, the software, the advice. It reminds me of the analogy. I don't know if it's the same in the Netherlands, but you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. So you can give people everything that they could need, but it's on them really, isn't it, to sort of have the push and the desire to get things right or to change things for the better. But hopefully it's making a big difference anyway. And JJ, so from a standards perspective, your work with the W3C Mobile Accessibility Task Force, how does that sort of tie into this? And have you been, I'm assuming that you've been very much involved with some of these changes and amendments to WCAG 2 ICT, but how does that work influence future legislation or global best practice?
So I've been involved with the Mobile Accessibility Task Force for around 4 years now. So the first 2 years just as an invited expert, as it's called, so just participating in the group, giving feedback. And then 2 years ago, I was asked, would you be interested to become the facilitator? So facilitator is just sort of organizing all the meetings and sort of leading the task force. And I decided to do that because I saw some opportunities where we improve and find more people that were willing to contribute. Because in the past it was sort of a smaller group, and now it's, I guess, more medium-sized. And then I think around a year ago, Tanya also joined the task force. Because a lot of times I was really discussing with her some of the meeting minutes and insights, and then it made sense for her to also join the meetings and give her perspective, because since 2 years or so I've mostly been involved just in the software development part of our company, and Tanya has been doing the audits, where in the past I was actually doing the audits together with Paul. And then now Paul and Tanya are mostly doing the audits, and then I'm doing the software development together with Mike. So it's the two of us on the software, and then the two of us more on the service side, and also some mix in there. But I think what I've really learned, and I've already been there 4 years now, is that first of all it's a slow process, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not, things are not changing very quickly, and it's mostly because in W3C, I think in most standard places, you would like to get a broad perspective and have many experts contributing, but you're also looking really closely at sort of every letter that's written, and looking really closely at those definitions, and then the combination of all those words to see how it's going to be interpreted and give supplemental guidance. So it's a lot of work, and also a lot of work to have everyone agreeing. But what I've personally, like one example I have from the EN standard is what I found out is that like page titled was currently not applicable to mobile applications. So this success criterion for websites is really important because it tells you to basically have the title attribute. So basically in a web browser, every tab is showing a title, and technically that's the title attribute that's being used on a web page. So success criterion is really easy on web, where every web page is basically able to set this attribute, and then you can check it. But then it becomes more difficult in apps where there's no such attribute on an app, and there's two different platforms. But yeah, how would you interpret this? Would it be the title attribute on the navigation bar, because that's what is visually usually showing the title? But some apps don't have this navigation bar, but they do have a title in the sense that it's maybe larger or bold. So do we need to look at semantics or characteristics? But what I found actually in EN standards, because it's still humans making it, that they actually made a mistake there, because they expected that it was part of the sets of web pages clause. That's sort of in a set of web pages, it has to have certain requirements. But for page title, it's actually looking at a single web page. So they actually marked it void incorrectly, because it's not about multiple web pages, it's about a single web page. But this is where I think get a little bit more in depth with what was done in WCAG to ICT. So that's what's now in the legislation, not only in the EN standard, but also in Section 508 and other standards or legislation, is that they basically replace web page. So from a single page, which is sort of part of a website, they replace it with application. So they're looking at the whole application. So where it reads normally set of web pages, it now reads set of applications. So it becomes sort of a set of software. So like you have Microsoft Office and Word and other applications that sort of form a suite. And then it becomes very different to interpret those success criterion. But yeah, I raised an issue there. So actually, Etsy actually has a GitLab, which is public, and you can actually just raise an issue there, and people will take a look at it. So I just raised this issue about page title, that actually it could be applied, but just to the title of the application. So that basically it would read that every app needs to have a title. But then you basically cannot fill it, because you cannot publish an app with an empty title, because you've never seen an app on your phone that doesn't have a title. Like potentially maybe it could have a space which has one character, or maybe it's invisible. But then we got into discussion, okay, but in a web page you can actually just set a title that tells you about this web page, but in an app it's not. Yeah, it's different. It's not about the content of the app. It can just be a brand name, and a brand can be trademarked, and a trademark could then potentially be an issue, because maybe it's not descriptive, but it's just the name of the company. So we got into some discussion there, and in the end, it's no longer void, but it does just have a note there that it's recommended in applications to have titles for each page, but then it's not really clear in an app what's the page. So there's still some flaws there. And those are just not going to be solved in WCAG 2. And that's basically a realization that WCAG 2, it's not perfect, especially for mobile applications or for any kind of non-web ICT. And then it is going to be fixed, but not in version 2. So WCAG 3 is supposed to solve all those issues, but it's already been in development for 10 years, and it's going to take another 5 to 10 years, realistically, before that's finished. So in the meantime, we're still sort of left hanging with making interpretations. And what we're doing as a group, Mobile Task Force, and also WCAG to ICT Task Force, they are just now giving feedback to the WCAG 3 work, and sort of fill those gaps and make sure that this version will be better. But like I said, it will take many years before it's finished, and then by the time it's finished, it will take many more years before it will actually be adopted in any legislation. So until then, we're sort of stuck on WCAG 2, and that's, I guess, what motivates Tanya and me to do the work for WCAG 2 Mobile, which is a document that we're working on in the Mobile Task Force until some of those issues are solved. We're just trying our best to sort of make informative guidance how do we as a group of experts interpret certain criteria?
Brilliant. And do you think it's such a tricky topic, isn't it? I was going to ask about anticipation rather than interpretation as well. So if you're anticipating things to change and sort of looking forward, is there anything in your own guidance that would say, well, actually, this isn't quite right, but you should be doing this? And then companies may be ready for when that has changed in legislation or in the WCAG guidelines. Or do you think we need to still just say, no, get this as is for now with this interpretation, and then hopefully it will meet that new criterion or new interpretation of that ruling?
Yeah, maybe I can start, but maybe Tanya also has some probably ideas there. But one item that comes to mind for me is with orientation. Like it's one of the requirements, so 1.3.4 orientation, that you need to support landscape mode as well as portrait mode. At least that's how we have interpreted on mobile devices. Like it's different on websites where it's more about sort of responsive design. Because you're not going to physically sort of rotate your monitor most of the times, but some people might do that. And then a lot of times when companies, especially during audits, they very often fail 1.3.4 orientation on landscape, so they only support portrait. So we've always told them, hey, you should also support landscape, but it's sort of a chicken and egg problem there, because a lot of apps don't support landscape. A lot of users are not using apps in landscape. I mean, some apps are sort of made for landscape, right? Some sort of, if you're watching videos, it makes sense. And there's other apps. Maybe if you have like one example in WCAG is like a piano app. If you are making an app to recreate piano keys, it makes more sense to use the wider viewport of your phone than sort of portraits. But what we've seen there in this criterion is that we have always suggested people to anticipate on this. So whenever they're building a new screen, maybe you cannot fix it in your current screens, but for the new screens you're building, just make sure those support landscape and portrait, because then by the time you maybe have finished all other issues in your app and you are starting to work on orientation on those older screens, then you don't have to worry about the new screens because you already solve that issue there. So that's maybe one example we have. I think it's always good to go beyond WCAG. Like we know from our app foundation as well, with our statistics, that there's so many people using accessibility features, but a lot of those accessibility features are not really covered in any success criteria from WCAG 2, or sometimes they are covered within AAA. So I think that's also something that we tell clients that, hey, if you maybe are now compliant with AA, maybe have a look at AAA, and maybe have a look at what Tanya mentioned, the target size one, but then the enhanced version. Because on apps, that's maybe actually the minimum you should be doing. So they just pick some of those AAA criteria and start doing some work on those to make your app even more accessible.
Yeah, I like that. The beyond WCAG as well. I think that's something that is often forgotten, because we are so focused on guidelines or checklists as well. It's like it's not a checklist. It's something that needs to be bred into every part of an app or a website or product. Amazing. Well, so before we go to sort of final thoughts and things, I just wanted to ask you both to maybe become even more of a seer than you already are. But talking about the future of mobile accessibility, it does feel like we're at a bit of an inflection point at the moment between automation, artificial intelligence or machine learning, but also the growing recognition that accessibility does need to be built in from day one. So what's exciting you about where technology is heading in this space? I guess in terms of testing and standards, JJ and Tanya, what would you see as the next big opportunity for the education and culture change side of things, utilizing new technologies? I don't know, Tanya, I feel like me and JJ have been talking for a while, so I don't know if you wanted to go first and then we'll bring JJ in
sure.
after.
Yes, sure. Well, I think I still think that the biggest opportunity is a mindset, of course. So we need to shift the mindset from fixing things to make it accessible to building apps accessible in the first way. So I hope that in terms of time in the future that it will be a standard. So if when you are learn how to become a developer, that accessibility will be part of it. So you just build things accessible and that's it. And that will solve the problem in the future, of course. And I think that what we see now and the mobile space is, of course, relatively new. It's not relatively new, but those who are developing mobile apps, they are not yet like old enough to experience the need of using accessible apps themselves, or probably that generation is just starting to experience like, oh, it's helpful if I can actually use the app with the enlarged text size. So when you understand that, okay, I'm dependent on the mobile device and on the mobile apps, so probably I should develop the accessible apps now so that I can pass it to the next generation and use it myself in the future. So I think that it's the biggest change. And of course, with the legislation, in the future, I hope that with the change that we are also doing within the mobile task force, that the guidelines that they will become more unified. And also personally, I hope that more people with disabilities will be involved in shaping those standards for mobile apps specifically, because I sometimes feel that we lack that knowledge a little bit. When we talk about the standards, then you should also test it with the end users, and of course they are involved somehow, but yeah, still it's a big black box to me sometimes. It's not always that if you follow the word of standard that it's helpful for the users. Maybe in some cases it's otherwise. And then, when it comes to organization, I just hope that it will be more often included in the definition of done. It will be offered as a standard package of the educational trainings within the organizations, and that the certifications will be required or more desired by the organization who hire developers. So when it becomes a part of the routine of the definition of done, then it's much less effort. And of course, building from the beginning in accessible way saves a lot of time at the end.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just sort of paving that way for people so that there's guardrails, right? So then people can just sort of, if you guide them in the right direction, then hopefully it just makes everyone's life a bit easier. But I love that, the mention of obviously bringing in more people with lived experience of different disabilities or impairments. Absolutely, because we've spoken an awful lot about standards and guidelines, but it's not always 100% as much as we'd like it to be. And then, so JJ, on your side on the more technical side, where do you see technology heading? Is it down the automated route? I know we've said that there needs to be a mixture of both, but it's very helpful in terms of reducing the amount of human hours, I suppose, on audits and things to have the automated tools. But what excites you about the future of accessibility in the mobile space?
Yeah, thanks. I guess I'm mostly enthusiastic about the opportunities sort of for automation. Now, I guess with AI, machine learning, all those technologies, we're sort of able to go beyond what we're able to do nowadays. I think it also helps automation. Like ideally, you basically need zero knowledge, and you can just hit a button, and it just tells you what issues you have, and also tells you how to solve it. Because I think that's a big difference with manual testing. Like Tanya mentioned, that you need a lot of knowledge to even get started and to interpret those results and deal with all those different interpretations, all different frameworks and different criteria and then different standards. I think that's really something that automation can do if it's used in the right way, that it can just tell you with certainty that this is an issue, but ideally also tell you how to fix it, and then ideally do this for multiple frameworks, including the one that the developer itself is using. So I do feel things like AI can help to create more code samples or to even transform code samples. Like if you know how something works on native Android to native iOS, you're sometimes able to make a plugin for those cross-platform frameworks. And maybe now with AI, you can actually tell them, okay, this is how I can do it on Android. I have this code snippet that works, that maybe was written by a human back then. How would I be able to port this to maybe Flutter or React Native? So I think there's opportunity there for developers. And I think the same opportunity exists for things like training, where maybe not everyone is an English speaker. So potentially you can use AI to make a new version of your training materials to offer it in more languages. So I see opportunities there. But I think very important remains that yes, AI has hallucinations or can come across as being very confident, but maybe it's not correct. So there are still challenges there, especially because we know on average the app developers don't have that much knowledge about accessibility, so if they're not able to sort of fact check the results, I think that can become dangerous, where maybe they are not, maybe sometimes fixing something that wasn't an issue before, and then also for the sort of AI generated fixes or code samples, there's also a challenge there that maybe it also breaks things or maybe is not an actual best practice. So there are some challenges there, but I think at the rate we're seeing AI and machine learning and all those technologies evolve now, I think we'll benefit there. And I do wonder if at some point, and it's also being discussed heavily at WTC, if we're seeing maybe a shift where now developers have to solve those things. We're maybe seeing that assistive technologies can potentially fix things. But I think that's also a slippery slope if you say, oh, maybe this assistive technology, maybe this screen reader is able to automatically generate alt text for images, or maybe it's being able to automatically detect buttons or the names of buttons and those things, but maybe another user doesn't have this exact technology, so not everyone has access to the same technology, so there's also some danger there. But all in all, I'm optimistic about the opportunities, and excited to see what's possible and how we can truly just make from both perspectives and just ensure users, like that's where it's about, that they can actually just use the app and achieve whatever task they would like to do within this app.
Yeah, agreed. I was about to sort of expand on that slightly, but then I feel like I would put a negative spin on it, so I don't want to do it. It was just purely around. I'm not going to do it. It's fine. What I'm going to do is something more positive, because there has been an awful lot of a positive discussion in this episode, and especially obviously talking about what yourselves and ABRA and the task force are doing, and it's just amazing to know how much of an impact you're having. So before we wrap up the episode, I just wanted to ask if you both individually had a message you'd like for listeners to take away, anything or something that you wish that every designer, developer or tester, anyone in this sort of space would remember when it comes to mobile accessibility. Tanya, I don't know if you want to go first.
Yes, I use this metaphor often, comparing accessibility with brushing teeth. And if I tell you that brushing your teeth once a year helps to keep them healthy, you would say at the time ridiculous, and that's correct because it's not possible. But that's often what companies do with relation to mobile accessibility: make an audit one time per year and then forget about it. So if you look at it a little bit closer, then you understand that having an electric toothbrush will not brush your teeth automatically. So if you have a tooling but you don't have a knowledge, it will not be helpful. But having all the knowledge about how to brush your teeth but not having a toothbrush will not help either, because then you will have to do it with your finger. So knowledge without the tooling is not helpful either. And if you never go to the dentist or use the floss or the mirror, then you will not know whether you are doing a good job. So if you don't go and check with an auditor or someone, an accessibility expert, you will not know whether you do a good job. So like brushing, when you think about mobile accessibility, think about brushing your teeth. And it works when it's part of your routine. Just daily, 2 times a day, just brush your teeth and then make it a habit, and then it works.
I love that. That's just absolutely brilliant. I'm going to have to clip that. So when we edit this episode, we'll be using that as a video. So thank you for sharing that. And Jan Jaap, sorry, hard to top that. But have you got a message?
Yes, it's hard to say. It's hard to top this. We should end it already. No, I think for me, I would just like to say, yeah, take a look at websites. I think they're still ahead in terms of accessibility. So see what you can learn there, and really look at maybe responsive design. Like, it's really common now in a website. Nobody's building, desktop only websites anymore, and everyone's building responsive or even mobile first. And I think people should also do that more for apps, especially I think people that are sort of buying apps, they should tell, hey, my app should not only be working on mobile devices like an iPhone or an Android phone, but also on Android tablets and on iPads and maybe on other form factors. Like now we have sort of those devices you can fold. So you just want your app to work on all those different devices and make sure all users have a good experience. And that includes landscape mode. And by doing landscape mode and by doing responsive design, you usually also fix other accessibility barriers like text scaling. Because if you already just make sure you can maybe do 1 column or 2 columns or 3 columns. Then if you start supporting larger text size, maybe you're also able to support that better because you already know that maybe not every row or every column will have the same size. So that's what I just want to say. Responsive design is not only for web, but also, for apps.
Nice. I think that we could caveat that with just do it. just do accessibility. Just think about it. Brush your teeth. Thank you both so much for joining me on the episode. What you're doing in the space is not unnoticed. I have many conversations here in the UK and with people around the globe that know what you're doing, and I'm always sort of pushing people your way to say, look, this is in the mobile space. Look no further. So, thank you for everything that you're doing, not just from me, but from everyone that you're benefiting. It's incredible work. And just really appreciate your time today. And I hope that we can work together more in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Joe. Thanks for those motivational words. And thanks for having us on the podcast.